Here we have a clinical psychologist, Dr. Ramani, who specialises in narcissism, about to describe how narcissists exploit sob stories in order to manipulate people. She's going to give details on various ways in which this plays out in real life and some of the mechanisms that keep people trapped in the control drama. I'm going to explain how these manipulations are based upon exploiting two emotions, sympathy and guilt, and how being emotionally literate with these emotions can keep sub-stories from taking root in the first place and preventing their continuation by stopping guilt trips manifesting.
So let's talk about this idea of how narcissists are so good at drawing you in with their sad, sad stories. So when a lot of people work backwards, one thing they will say, and whether it was a romantic relationship, a friendship, a work collaboration, or even within their own family, they will say, and especially in romantic relationships, that narcissistic person, that toxic person, early in the game would tell them really, really, really difficult stories about their past. I mean, really difficult stories. And sometimes they would do this as soon as in their first conversation or their first date. Stories of childhood abuse, childhood neglect, childhood abandonment, terrible other tragedies that might have even befallen them when they were adults.
Sympathy is created from identifying with another's experience, and especially perceptions of distress. And one of our innate motivations of this emotion is to aid the distressed person. We want to help them. This motivation of sympathy is an evolutionary mechanism that's highly adaptive, yet particularly appropriate to the family environment, where healthy parent-child interactions are dependent upon its expression. For example, when people see a sad face, evidence shows that they instinctively sympathise with the owner. Onlookers have physiological responses and expressions to perceptions of distress, and these manifest as overt attempts to help from children as early as 8 months old and adults. The eyebrows and cheeks are what humans predominantly use to detect sadness and distress, and there is a direct link between our subconscious processing of these features and our instinctive willingness to help that person. We are talking about an innate emotion which is necessary for the healthy development of our children, instinctively motivates us to give aid, and is being expressed from the age of 8 months old. So this is a fundamental and immensely powerful emotion that is millions of years old. Yet, it can be exploited.
Many people will say that very early in a relationship, a person who is very narcissistic would often sort of spin their life in a very victimized manner and talk about how life was very unfair and unkind to them. That by itself isn't so much the issue, talking about how things didn't quite go right for them. What you've got to then link it to is how are they treating you? People would often say that because that narcissistic toxic person was sharing all of these really, really sad stories from their past, that they would feel that they had no right to think negatively of that narcissist because they had such a tough life. In other words, they're using that narcissist's difficult, traumatic, painful history to write excuses for their behavior now. Yeah, he does get angry really quickly, but God, he had a really angry dad. Or, yeah, she does get really worked up and she's really, really jealous and is always grabbing my phone, but she did go through a lot of abuse. Or, yeah, he does often tell lies, but lots of people told him lies all his life. It gives you the fuel to start writing the excuses, giving the second chances, and writing the rationalizations to let this person off the hook.
As the doctor puts it here, the fuel to let the person off the hook. That fuel to which she's referring is sympathy. Bundled with the motivation to help people in distress are cognitive biases which allow us to overlook the present state of the distressed person or be forward looking. After all, that's the implicit intention of aiding someone. A person is in one state and the intention is to deliver them to a better state of being. This idea can be more easily understood if we think of another emotion. Cuteness could be considered an evolutionary emotion that compels parents to overlook a child's inappropriate behaviour due to innocence. We don't punish babies and toddlers for many of the mistakes they make because they don't know they're making mistakes. Yet we don't have to think this through most of the time, for we simply see them as cute, and that emotion automatically causes us to discount any problems their behaviour has caused because they don't deserve punishment. Sympathy contains a similar instinctive motivation which is aimed at helping people out of their present circumstance. Thus, making rationalizations and excuses is far more easily done when sympathizing. Emotions are created by our perception of a situation. So if we believe a perception, we feel the emotion appropriate for that perception with all of its cognitive biases too, whether the circumstances are being relayed with an honest intent or not. Therefore, if people realise that we instinctively give them help if they feign distress, they can exploit this evolutionary reaction so that our time and effort is redirected towards their goals. An emotion which is necessary for healthy relationships gets corrupted into helping those who are exploiting our time and resources.
But when you get to the narcissistic end of things, it gets more tricky because they're not in touch with their insecurity. That's why the manipulation takes place. How do I trick this person close to me? Because in my unconscious soul that I'm not aware of, I know they don't really want to be with me, so I got to trick them in. Playing victim is a great way to draw someone in because most of us want to rescue other people. Being as I've spoken about before in the Narcissistic Magnet video, being a rescuer is a major vulnerability for being a narcissistic magnet because now you see them as a project. Now you can imagine if you're a rescuer and you meet someone who tells you an incredibly, incredibly tragic story and then goes on to behave really badly in the relationship. You view them as a project. If I just love them enough, I will take away all of their original hurts and then they will love me and it'll be Beauty and the Beast, Part 2. And a lot of people live their entire lives, their entire relationship with that structure.
Experiencing sympathy is an implicit part of the rescuer personality complex. It's what fuels the need to help people. So the more we lose control of our sympathetic pathways, the more of a narcissistic magnet we become. For we easily get drawn into relationships where we perceive a distressed person. Thus, anybody front-loading their conversation with distress is going to draw us in, and we want to help them, whilst being more prone to excusing their behaviour. Simply understanding the emotion of sympathy can prevent us from being sucked in, for it causes us to contextualise situations more carefully, and we aren't left feeling that our urge to help is part of some kind of divine plan for the person. We limit our sympathy to what is appropriate for the present situation rather than getting lost in an intense and instinctive motivation to help, which starts generating hopes of how we can best rescue the person in front of us.
But again, back to the idea of manipulation, because a narcissist will often use manipulation to draw someone close, and they recognize that telling you all these sad, sad stories about them, and maybe not even all of them are true, but they'll tell you these sad stories, and they'll even tell you sad stories about the present. You won't believe it. I had this great idea, and it was stolen. I started this business, and my business partner walked away with it. Like, they really seem like a treasure trove of bad luck. When they start seeing it's working, that it's keeping you on the hook, then they recognize that, this is working. My sort of sad sack story here is drawing this person in and keeping them close. And now they feel like not only do they need to rescue me, They're using it as they're letting me off the hook. And make no mistake, the narcissistic person has no problem pulling their abuse card or their trauma card or their really difficult background card out in an argument and trying to hurt you with it. I can't believe you're not more sympathetic to why I get angry. I had a really hard childhood. Anger is really hard for me. You will notice in that whole sentence, there was never an apology. There's never the ownership that maybe my anger hurt you. Maybe my anger frightened you. Maybe my anger was disproportionate to you. None of that. Instead, they will simply say, you need to excuse my anger because I've been through so much. And they really won't care about your feelings.
You can't excuse the anger, even though your sympathetic nature may want you to let it fly unaddressed. Anger is created by a perception of injustice, and it's designed to prepare us to tackle those who are responsible for the unfairness. What this means for when anger is directed at us is that we're implicitly being accused of unduly hurting someone. Now that's what causes us to feel guilt. When someone inappropriately treats us with anger, we are at risk of developing a guilt complex if we believe we may have done something wrong. Guilt instinctively causes us to stop whatever action of ours is offensive and seek to give restitution to the injured party to make up for their losses. An evolutionary emotion which is at the heart of a functional family and morality itself can be corrupted into making us stop whatever we're doing and give things to people who are abusing us. People who seek to exploit the best of our humanity for their own selfish gain try to make us feel guilt by inappropriately expressing anger towards us. Such emotional abuse is deeply disturbing and causes an array of social dysfunctions as it corrupts the moral fabric of society and civilization itself. It's difficult to conceive of an action more selfish than abusing anger to elicit guilt.
So you can see then that they've weaponized their history. So some of you are thinking, okay, I am not the narcissistic person. I am a kind person. If somebody's had a really rough backstory, I don't just want to walk away from them. I don't want to leave them. That feels cruel to me. I get it. I mean, you know that I'm a huge proponent of compassion and empathy. And I actually truly believe you can hold on to your compassion and empathy even as insecure narcissistic people are using their difficult backstories or even difficult current stories as a way not only to manipulate you, but to use it as a way to rationalize their bad behavior. You can show compassion, and sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to say, I hear that you've had a really, really difficult start and a difficult backstory, and I understand that, and empathize with them and say, I really, really think it may be important for you to get the help you need, to do the work you need to do, so that you feel healthy entering a relationship. Now, I'm telling you, if you say that to them, it's going to be World War 52. They are going to lose their mind. They're going to call you every name in the book. They're going to tell you you're a cruel human being for wanting to walk out on them when the chips are down. They're going to tell you that you're re-victimizing them and scream at you and call you every name in the book. And for most of you, you're going to crack at that point and say, they're right, I need to stand by their side. And then a whole new series of gaslighting, verbal abuse, invalidation, devaluation, discarding will start. That much I can promise you.
Let's go over this crack point where people give in to the narcissist's guilt trip and exactly what's going on here. First of all, in this scenario, the narcissist has drawn us into a relationship with them with tales of misfortune and distress, which have caused us to feel sympathy towards them, so we are motivated to aid and help them. This is what's forming the basis of our interest in them. When we perhaps start realizing that our sympathy is misplaced and start withdrawing it, the narcissist treats us to a burst of angry insults, saying, "How could you be so mean and lack compassion? How could you abandon me in such a state? How could you be so cold-hearted? You're a cruel human being, and you're re-victimizing me. Or, you've done nothing but taken advantage of me. All of these expressions are designed to make you feel guilt while you're withdrawing your sympathy. So the cognitive mechanisms of guilt kick in and you cease withdrawing sympathy. That's the emotional dynamic at play here. 3 emotions are on the field: sympathy, anger, and guilt. Only from an emotional literacy point of view, the narcissist has made a vital mistake. Getting angry with people for withdrawing their sympathy is grossly inappropriate and abusive. Sympathy is a caring emotion and cannot be abusive itself. So the only other avenue for an angry expression is an accusation of neglect. But sympathy is currently being given and is in the process of being withdrawn. So neglect cannot be correct. For sympathy is and has been given up until this point. Neither accusation of abuse or neglect can be legitimately applied to withdrawing sympathy. So this means there is no grounds for the narcissist's expression of anger other than to have you falsely believe you're guilty so that they can take advantage of your goodwill.
This is a really, really tricky line to negotiate because obviously you might meet a very good person who's had a very difficult backstory. But here's the difference. That very good person who's had a difficult backstory will treat you well. They will communicate clearly if they do get angry. Because many people with histories of trauma or other difficult starts in life do sometimes have difficulty with emotional regulation, but they learn to take ownership of it. They'll say, I am so sorry. My anger was inappropriate. Are you okay? And they'll own it. And they'll check in with you. And you will feel heard. And together you might grow through this. And they may even consider things like therapy together with you to work on this. That's not the story I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the person who literally uses their self-victimization as a tool to draw you in and as a tool of a rationalization to continue to keep you in a toxic, dysfunctional relationship. I cannot tell you how many people I've worked with who will say, this is done. This person has done and said every cruel thing a person can do. I am a shred of my former self. I have lost pretty much everything I stand for. They may just be fighting for their kids at this point. A lot of them have become more isolated from their families. They have lost themselves, their identities, and their souls in these relationships. But they'll say, this person, my narcissistic partner, is so broken and has been through so much and has been so traumatized. I feel so guilty leaving them.
Again, guilt is genuinely felt when we hurt somebody unduly. When we injure someone for no good reason and for selfish gain, that's when we properly experience guilt. Nevertheless, the things that guilt motivates us to do, namely stop what we're doing and give restitution, these things will be experienced whether we feel the guilt appropriately or not. That's why people use guilt trips when we're doing something they don't want us to do, such as withdrawing sympathy. If they successfully get us to experience guilt at these times, they manipulate us into stopping whatever actions they don't want us to do. So we end up following their agenda instead of ours. All emotions can be exploited. By understanding the different emotions and what they motivate us to do, we become emotionally literate and can prevent ourselves from being abused in such ways. Links to the articles on each of the emotions discussed and the original video are in the description below.